Hello, and welcome to Champions of Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming. I'm your host, Treavor Bettis, and with me each week are two amazing people that know way more about this than I ever will. Mitra Jordan is a registered clinical counselor with a counseling and psychotherapy practice in Vancouver, BC. Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, is the clinical director for Take This and Dabney on clinical role. They'll be talking about mental health in these unprecedented times, as well as how gaming affects us. If you're live with us here in the chat, you can leave a question that I might ask them later in the show. But before that, our topic today is finding a therapist. And for more on that, I pass it over to Mitra and Dr. B.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Why don't you both, because again, we don't assume anybody's been here before. Why don't you both introduce yourselves again?
Okay, I am a therapist and clinical counselor working in Victoria, British Columbia, and I'm thrilled about this topic. Super excited to get into it.
I'm a doctor of clinical psychology. I don't practice because I do nothing but education and policy work these days, but I was extensively clinically trained, and I can certainly talk about the work I used to do with people. And I'm also, this is something that I'm excited about because this is a question that we get more often than anything else over at Take This. In fact, our expert article on how to find a therapist who works for you is probably our most utilized resource. If you're interested in looking for that, please go over to takethis.org. But one of the biggest misconceptions I encounter from people, or one of the biggest hesitations, is just what is therapy like? Because we have such a bad image of it, thank you media, of either that horrible asylum trope where all of the mental health professionals are evil, or it's some I hesitate. I always feel self-conscious about this, but some like bearded dude with a gray beard just going, yeah, well, tell me about your mother. So, Mitra, what's therapy like?
Well, therapy is a place where people can feel safe to explore and consider things that otherwise are too difficult, or they just don't have the room for that in their lives, because your daily life is kind of on the go and you're usually working to survive depending on what's going on in your life. And so therapy is a safe space where you get to have someone who is working for you. And I can't stress that part enough, to help you work through the goals that you have, that you want to make your life work better for you. So I don't know if that answers how it feels when you walk in the door and you're feeling super anxious about being there. And I'm going to assure you that your therapist, your new therapist that you just met, that you probably, if you're seeing them in person now, did not shake hands with and maybe wearing a mask. But if you're on a Zoom call, they're nervous too. They're nervous because they haven't met you. They want to put you at ease, and they don't necessarily know you terribly well. They may have had a quick chat with you or even a Zoom call. But yeah, we want to put you at your ease, and we want you to feel like you're somewhere safe where you can say anything. So that's the aim.
But like, what's the process like with you? Like, if I were to come to a therapy session with you, should I expect that there's going to be a fainting couch there, and I'm going to have my back facing you, and I'm just going to free associate, and you're going to tell me that the snake in my dreams really wasn't a snake, and it's not the snake I'm afraid of?
Yeah, I could tell you lots of things about that. What's it like? So, I don't know a lot of therapists who work psychoanalytically. There are psychoanalytic therapists who do have couches, but I can guarantee you they don't use them as often as you would think. No, my clients sit face to face with me. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel like I'm listening. They know I'm engaged in being there with them. So you'd walk in. If you haven't seen me before, you would have received my consent form. Um, or you come in and we look at the consent form together so that you have an opportunity to ask questions, so that you know the limits of confidentiality. This is a really big one. What are the circumstances under which I can no longer hold confidentiality? And things like court cases, or things like, we need to admit you to a hospital because of your suicidal thoughts and feelings. Particularly, you've got plans. Those are the kinds of things that kind of limit confidentiality. But we would go over all that. We would work out what the complaints process might look like, should there be one. And I don't want to scare people, but I do think that those are really important things for a client to know before they start work. What if they're not happy with how things go? You know, what then? What do they do? How much do I charge? They should know that before they come in for their first session. So there's some housekeeping, I would call it, stuff that we need to get through so that people can feel comfortable being there. And then we would get into what's brought you here. How are you doing? What are your goals? And assuring them that they can pretty much ask me anything that they need to in terms of who I am to feel comfortable in the session. Within reason, I'll answer those questions. So, yeah, that's what you would expect to feel like. You could sit down, feel safe, feel like you could say what you needed, feel like you were in a supported place to do that.
I will say, going back to towards the beginning of what you're saying, of like the therapist is like nervous too about it. Like, I never thought about
Yeah.
that, and that kind of like going into the future, whenever
Mhm.
I am able to look for a therapist again, that I think that's gonna make me feel a little bit better. So it's just like,
Good.
oh, I'm not only the one that's nervous about this.
No, because I mean, depending on where people work, and once again, I want to remind everybody that I don't currently work with people, but I trained thousands of hours in grad school and postdoc working with people, but it was always kind of a crapshoot, like what was going to happen, especially depending on the setting in which you worked, and personality fit is one of the biggest, most important factors
Yeah.
in that therapeutic outcome, which the research supports this, that it's probably the biggest controllable factor in therapeutic outcome. And on a just sort of common layperson level, it makes sense. If you can't trust your therapist to be vulnerable
Mhm.
in front of them, if you can't trust your therapist to kind of create what's called a holding space for your emotions and for your experiences in a way that you trust is supportive and hopefully judgment free, then you're probably not going to get a whole lot of benefit out of therapy, no matter how
Mhm.
well trained they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a really crucial part of it. You shouldn't feel like you're with your best friend who's going to support you through every single thing you say, but you should feel like you are supported to feel the things you need to. And then there are challenges coming up to some of the assumptions or a broader discussion of the themes in your life or the narrative that's brought you to those conclusions around your life. So it's like being with someone who can. Um, really support you, but also honestly help you take a look at yourself.
I, I think I had an analogy in my head as you both were saying that, because that makes a lot of sense about not wanting them to be your friend.
Mhm.
It's kind of like say that I had a sudden change of life decision where I'm like, I'm gonna learn gymnastics, and I'm gonna learn how to do some things. I'm not gonna want my friend there to tell me how to do stuff. I want someone who knows what they're doing
Yeah.
and is there to support me literally that time with like, physically holding me up and making sure I don't fall down.
Yeah.
I want someone there who's going to do that, and not someone who is going to be like, oh, that was a fantastic flip when it looked like like that or something. So yeah, I that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and one of the things, this is a conversation I used to have with people a lot, because we've already broached the topic of the relationship, but therapeutic relationships are a little weird, they are a little strange in that, for the most part, they're one way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a legitimate relationship. But when you think about it, Mitra already brought up the idea of your best friend. When you think about somebody who's like your best friend, there's a reciprocity. There's a two-way relationship there. You
Mm-hmm.
disclose, they disclose. You commiserate, they commiserate.
Oh.
You know the intimate details and embarrassing stories about them. They were probably there for you with yours. And when it comes to a mental health professional, that is considerably more one way.
Mm-hmm.
You are sharing intimate details about yourself, and they are not reciprocating with the intimate details of their life, which at first for a lot of people feels real weird because it's different than anything most of us have been socialized to engage in.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't make it any less of a real relationship. It's just got different parameters around it.
Yeah, definitely. And if a therapist does use self-disclosure, it needs to be appropriate and to fitting to the client's experience. So I have sometimes used examples of events in my life in order to illustrate them for a client, partly because I don't want to use other clients' experiences. I don't want my client to be sitting there thinking, did that happen in the previous session? With somebody else, ever. So yeah, I might sometimes use myself. Um, and, but it's not about sharing my issues. I don't, the client should never feel a sense of holding space for the therapist. I am there working for you. So if by any chance I mention, yeah, it is really tough when a pet dies, I really get that. Then, and a client's like, oh, tell me about, your cat or something, then I will a little bit, just to kind of help them know that they're not alone in that experience, or that here's some things that one can do to get through it. And some of it's my personal experience, and some of it's the literature. But so that's about sort of sharing space with your client, and in that moment equalizing it, because it is a very unequal relationship in the sense that they are, as you say, spilling their guts, and I am not. And that can feel very unequal in terms of vulnerability in the room. But it's the purpose of it so that a person gets to feel really safe and held, and never at any point does a client have to take care of my emotional world. And that's
Mm.
new for a lot of people. And that's a really important piece of it as well.
Yeah, it's so weird to think about it. Where else in your life? And this is actually how this is how I advertise therapy to people. I'm like, no, therapy is pretty awesome. Let me tell you why. Where else in life can you pay the low price of and have somebody focus completely on you for 1 hour? But I feel selfish talking about me. That's the point. That is the
For sure.
point. You have their if they're a reasonably decent therapist, you have their full attention for that hour.
Yeah.
Which
Absolutely.
once you kind of sink into it is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a really important part of it, is that you do feel attended to in that way. And so if you ever feel like your therapist is, going to sleep, or like they say things like, what about your brother? Are they a support in your life? And you're like, I told you last week that they died, 5 years ago. Like, you do not want that to happen. I'm just saying, you want your therapist to really kind of remember
Yeah.
about the experiences that you've shared. And it's, I know it sounds weird to say this, but it's actually, it's a valid thing that's come up for people. It's like somehow the therapist seems to have missed really important facts of their life that they did share. So we don't want that happening.
In
That's
in prepping for this episode, we had a conversation about therapists and stuff, and I told you about the therapist that I realized was not good for me. I won't
Yeah.
go into details here because it doesn't particularly matter. But yeah, that, I mean, again, that was another red flag. That therapist
Mm.
100% did that, where they're like, well, what about this? I'm like, that is not me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think going forward is, I know that the therapy is me, like Dr. B said, I get an hour of someone's time to be focused on me, but like, I think I need to go into it also looking for those red flags, though, being aware of those red flags.
Yeah.
Because I think before I just assumed, no, every therapist is fine. Like, I'll just go into it and it will help me, and it will, everything will be okay. So,
Nope.
yep.
No. Well, and we talked about this a little yesterday, and I was really, as we were prepping for this, I was really surprised to find out, and really happily surprised to find out, that Mitra and I, back in the days when I used to work with clients, had and she has a similar intake question, and that is, what are you not looking for in a therapist? You know, Mitra, why do you ask that?
Because I think that there's two reasons. First of all, if you've had therapy before, there might be some things that really didn't work, and you really just don't ever want to see them happening in therapy again. And the second one is that if you haven't had therapy, you may have a lot of ideas and fears about what you don't want to have happen. And so it's an important thing to address early on, because I don't want a client to ever be sitting in anxiety about, you know, repetition of a negative experience in therapy, or a fear that they have about what therapy is going to be like. So let's get it out there. And let's also talk about, they might have been a perfectly good therapist that somebody saw, but the modality didn't work for them.
Modality
Or
meaning what?
modality meaning the way someone practices. So there's different schools of therapy, there's different ways of practicing, and they don't all work with every client. And I think when we were speaking briefly yesterday, we kind of talked about, how some therapists are directive and might give you homework to do, or might jump in and sort of share, what they're hearing the client say, and then maybe ask, you've mentioned this path, this path, and this path. Which way would you want to go? And that's a little bit more directive in terms of the therapy offering guidance versus some therapists who really just are sounding boards. And the sounding board piece doesn't work for everyone. And the more guided directive therapy also doesn't work for some people. So it's important to have a sense of what you're looking for, and then feel it out as you're there, and also ask your therapist if they can shift their process into how they work. Maybe they can't, maybe they can, right? But they should be able to, if they're any good.
Well, no, you're bringing up something important here, and we touched on this about how important personality fit is.
Yeah.
And for some people like me, I'm first of all, I'm well versed in a lot of psychological concepts.
Yeah.
I'm fairly self-efficient, I'm self-effective when it comes to managing things. If I'm at the point that I'm seeing a therapist, I don't want somebody as a sounding board. I have that, and this is for me.
Yeah.
I've got plenty of friends who are willing to be my sounding board. I want someone who has expertise, who's going to give me actionable tips for me to improve my life, and probably some homework so I can carry that through and practice it. But that's me. I'm, also have a couple of degrees in this, so I really know what I'm looking for. And what I'm not looking for, because I've done enough therapy on both ends of it. But a question that I had as we were talking for you, Mitra, is like, what questions in that initial session are people often nervous to ask that you really wish they'd ask, that you just love for them to ask?
I'm taking notes.
I'm thinking back. I think people are quite hesitant to ask really important questions about where I stand in terms of social justice issues. People need to feel, for instance, I often work with LGBTQIA two-spirit populations. I work with a lot of people who identify as queer, and I am very comfortable working with them, and those are the groups that are often actually more comfortable because of their own experience in terms of discrimination, asking about where do I stand, how do I work, who am I as a therapist, am I comfortable working with them, which is wonderful. But I'll often get clients who are bicultural or multicultural, and I notice it really changing now. But some of those clients, particularly if they're older, often it's difficult for them to ask those kinds of questions about how well will they be received, how culturally aware and knowledgeable I am as a therapist, what's my training like in that. And then questions around my training in general can be awkward for people to ask, partly because they don't always, as you say, you're very knowledgeable, Dr. B. Not all clients are knowledgeable about what they are looking for in a therapist. And so that's something that I'm really happy to explore with them in terms of how they work. But this again speaks to that power differential we're talking about. So I'm knowledgeable about something and they're asking me to share a little bit of that, and they might feel really awkward about it. So, um, and then I think when people are having strong, major issues around relationship, um, those are questions that are scary for them to ask, because they might be questions that they're not sure about what answer they're looking for. So they might
Mm.
ask questions about, would you be able to tell if I if my relationship won't work? You know,
Mm.
so those kinds of questions can be scary and awkward for people to ask.
I have a follow up thing with that, and I know
Mm.
this one's mainly about finding a therapist, but my thoughts also keep coming back to how do I know to stay with a therapist, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a chance to actually ask the therapist that I had this question because while I was feeling like I don't think they and I are on the same page, as far as like where I am and where they might think I am, and so I was. What I had planned to do until I wasn't able to go see them anymore was to ask, how do you feel I'm doing with
Mm-hmm.
the therapy? Do you think that is a reasonable question to ask?
Yeah, and in fact, I think it should be something that therapists are checking in with you about. Because
Mm.
I check in with people nearly every session, and I don't want them to say, "Oh, it's great," because they're scared, right?
Yeah,
I don't want them
yeah.
to feel
That
like they
power
have to please their
differential again.
therapist to
Yeah.
feel okay.
Yeah,
But I do want to check in with them. How was this for you? What things were useful? What things, let's explore how the session went. So I'd like to leave a little room for that, either towards the end of a session or at the start of the next one. How was your week? How were you doing? How did the last session sit with you? That kind of thing.
that's
So, how am
fantastic.
I doing is something that is uppermost in every client's mind, and they should get to explore that.
Okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, and just to frame that a little, I mean, talking about style, back when I was, in my training days, I was trained heavily in a form of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy because I was trained by one of the students of the person who created it. Um, and getting feedback from clients about how they think therapy is going is a routine part of that process because um, this is a personal style, this was a personal bias thing. I used to tell clients that I view my job as a consultant. I
Mm.
am an expert on generalized concepts of change. You are the expert on you. I work for you, literally. You pay me.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to make sure that the services I'm providing you, my boss, are working for you. And it was shocking to me how many of them, when I spoke to them about that, and I said, I work for you, literally, that they were like, I'm sorry, what? It really shifted that power dynamic a lot. And that's something, unfortunately, I just don't hear as many therapists doing to maybe this is my own personal bias, but trying to make that power differential as minimized as possible
Yep.
and make it as egalitarian as we can, because just it's kind of a social justice thing for me. But
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's
it,
hugely important. I tell clients I work for them all the time. They are hiring me, they are paying me. It's there. And this is where I think it's also really important that a therapist asks themselves in a session, is it useful for the client that we're spending time on this? So of course, when a client brings something up, that's important and that's useful. But there are times where the conversation can go off track, right? And you
Mm.
find yourself talking about this wonderful hobby that they have and that and but it's important to bring it back. So if the session is alive with a lot of authentic emotion in it, as in you're feeling like you're getting to say the things you needed to say in that session, you feel like the therapist was paying attention to maybe what your goals were for the session, because we'll often do that at the start of a session. What's really important right now? Like, where would you like to start? We'll talk. halfway through, I'm mindful of the time. I want to make sure that what needs to be said in this session gets said. And this is how I help, by working for them, like, so that you go away and you feel like, okay, that was really useful this week. I've got something to work with. I feel like I got to unload. I feel like a relief. Any of those things are important and good to get to. So, yeah. And if that's not happening and therapy feels like it's stale, or you don't feel like you're in the room there with the therapist, like whether you're on Zoom or not, you should feel that there's a movement for you in terms of getting your needs met, your feelings met. So, yeah,
Okay.
I'm rambling now.
No, no, no. Hey, that's fine. That's fine. Let's actually take a quick mid-show break to remind everyone of our disclaimer, because again, we do ask for you to put questions into the chat, but please keep these in mind. Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosure of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and the links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resources. We assume no liability for the use of this information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your best judgment. And like I said, we do fully endorse people asking questions in the chat, but please remember that this is we can't give you the actual like therapy or advice that you might be looking for, and that if you. I'm going to add this part here. If you have any suggestions on what topics you would like us to talk about, we actually have an email set up. It is championsofpsychology@codenameentertainment.com. So if you have any suggestions for things you would like to hear Mitra and Dr. B talk about, and me maybe occasionally say something funny, just send that into that email and we'll take a look at it. Dr. B, you said in our little side chat there that there was a question that in the chat that you'd like to address now. That's from Hazen, which is how do you know you need a therapist?
There I have a quick rule of thumb for myself on that, and that's if I'm questioning whether or not I should go see a therapist, I should probably go see a therapist.
Yes.
I mean, it's just like I used to have a supervisor who would say about difficult cases, because he's got grad students who are trying to be the best they can be. And he used to tell all of us, if you're debating calling me, call me. Better
like
safe than sorry.
I like that.
And the worst in my mind any decent therapist is going to say to me if I go see them is, you're doing better than you think. You're actually coping with things fairly well, all things considered. Maybe there's some skills we could work on, but you're doing okay.
No, I that's something that has come up in my group of friends several times. Is like, well, like, should I go see theirs? I'm like, I can't tell you that, but I will say this, it literally doesn't hurt. Like, if you have the ability to at least go once, check it out, see if it's for you. They're not gonna, snicker behind your back if you leave and never come back. They don't care. They'll care if you actually do need the help. They would want to help you. So, try it. I have actually at one point said, like, everyone should go to therapy. I don't care what for. Everyone should go to therapy.
Yeah, I mean, no one's life is perfect, right? And so I find what sometimes happens for people is they're like, I shouldn't have anything to complain about. My life is good and I have a job and I have this and I have that. So, why am I here? And it's like, well, what's going on for you? Like, you've given me the outline that things are good. What's happening for you emotionally that, what are you thinking about that brought you here? So I think that there's always space for self-exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, even if it's just like a session or two, or if it's like, no, that's great. You're doing a review of things. You want to think about the decisions you're making or the path you're taking or the path you didn't take that, you're now thinking about. It's still all valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And no therapist who's good at what they're doing is going to say, ah, yes, sign up for multiple sessions in one go and we'll see. I think it's so
No.
important that people
Yeah.
get to choose
Yeah.
week by week or month by month or however they want to do it in terms of who they're seeing and how frequently. So
When I first started going to therapy, finding out that like you basically made the appointment like by each time you went. At first, I was like, "Oh, that's really weird," and then after the more I thought, I'm like, "No, that's actually kind of really nice because I can just decide when and when not I'm going to go." I got to set the pace because it was like at first I was going every week, and eventually after a month I was like, I don't feel like. I feel like 2 of these sessions I'm just rambling about the same stuff I was rambling about the week before. So I took it down to every other week. So yeah, I love that part of it.
Well, and most ethical codes that I know about, they actually, that's part of it, that therapy and mental health, largely due to its unfortunate history, we're not supposed to be exploiting people. We are there to help.
Mm-hmm.
And if you,
oh, yeah.
right. And so, I mean, if you're not getting any more benefit out of it, it's, by most ethical codes that I know, unethical to keep having somebody pay money. This is why I don't know anybody that will sell you therapy sessions in blocks. All right. This is not like a punch card where come to 10 sessions, get the 11th diagnosis free. You don't do that.
Yeah.
It's just not okay.
Mm-hmm.
The point is to put yourself out of business. That's the whole goal.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have had people who sort of say, I want to book a couple of appointments. Totally fine. Nobody's asking you to pay for them. If you feel like Thursdays at 4 is your day and you think you're going to need the next 2 or 3 Thursdays, great. And, give me 24 hours notice, more if you can. If you don't want to do that following Thursday or 2 or whatever, that's fine. I want people to feel like the appointment's there for them when they need it, but not to feel like they're obligated to take it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mhm.
really important because therapy is about you, and you should never feel obligated to have to explore your feelings and emotions in a therapeutic setting unless you want to. Therapy doesn't work unless you want to.
Do you think that might have to do with the fact that like, I mean, this is outside perspective of it, like therapy is still, you're going to see a doctor like that still has that like going to a hospital kind of mentality to it. So, normally the hospital's like, you will be here at this day, you will give us this much blood. Or, like even like my dentist, like he's like, oh man, your wisdom teeth look fine. We should take them out anyways though. And it's like, that's not the kind of thing that is going to happen with where they're telling you what you should do with showing up.
I just got to say, your hospital sounds like a bad mechanic. Here's what I see. The engine needs an oil change right now, but I feel like those brake pads are going to be going out in the next 40,000 miles. So
it does feel like that. Like I one time I did go to get my blood drawn.
Do you want to talk?
Yeah, 100% now. I went to go get my blood drawn at my hospital one time, and I go around the corner, and there's 5 vials sitting on there. I'm like, who else is showing up?
Is your hospital run by Strahd? Do you want to chat?
Can I get the Strahd puppet to talk to?
The finger puppets!
Strahd, when you turn a corner and there's 5 vials waiting for you.
We're very happy. Make 6 is even better. Let's have lots of blood, people.
The worst part of that story, they didn't even check to make sure I had someone to drive me home.
But your therapist, I really, and maybe this is a stylistic thing, and maybe that's just a personal philosophy thing, but I really do believe your therapist should be your collaborator in things. Oba Lauren said in the chat earlier that not everybody is a good fit. But also, and you brought up an interesting point, Treavor, that everybody should, it's like going to see the doctor. Well, not every therapist has a doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, many people with doctorates don't do therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know, Mitra, you wanted to touch on this, like jurisdictional differences and all that.
Oh, I love that. Jurisdictional differences.
Yeah. So there are therapists in the U.S. Therapists are licensed to work by state, as I understand it, and in Canada we're licensed or regulated provincially, and not every province has regulation in place. So, in fact, in British Columbia, where I practice, I'm part of an association, and there is oversight in the association. There's a registration process. You have to have your master's, you have to have a certain number of skills and courses specifically within that master's degree. You can't just sort of come along with a master's. You have to, for instance, have group therapy in there and some family therapy background. There's a bunch of things that they look for, but there isn't a College of Counseling Therapists regulating us as therapists in BC. There is in, I think, New Brunswick. There is in Ontario, but it's sort of province by province. And so, what you also need to look for then for in the U.S. is how are the states regulating and licensing? Are they all the same? They might not be. And that's something to take into account. There you go, Dr. B.
No,
And
it gets real complicated.
yeah, and you want your therapist to have some form of oversight or jurisdiction. It's not just about the complaints process, but it's also about their code of ethics. There are specific codes of ethics that we're supposed to follow and that we're bound by in our practice. And you want a therapist who is bound by a code of ethics so that you can trust that they're an ethical therapist. That's really important. So, someone who's practicing outside of any kind of jurisdiction or oversight or governing body, um, if therapy doesn't go so well and if you feel harmed or by your therapist in some way, what's your complaints process? What's your recourse?
Mm-hmm.
How do you get justice done? In other words, is that therapist just free to practice and continue to do harmful things? Like, that's a problem. So, oh, and a clinical social worker is also bound by a college of social work, so they're a good option as a therapist too. So.
I gotta say, when you were saying jurisdictions and justice for, I just picture this person sitting in at a doctor's appointment and they're like, I don't know, I just feel like, and then the door gets kicked in and it's a therapist with a badge. It's like, this is my case now.
Well, one of the reasons that's important to recognize is that and if you can do the background homework on this, and this is even something to ask if you go to a therapist or anybody for the first time, because therapist is this really broad term that in Washington state, where I live, in the United States, there are a lot of different types of professions that can do therapy.
Yeah.
Psychiatrists can technically do therapy, although most of them don't. Psychologists can do therapy, and many of them do, but psychologists also do like cognitive testing. Like when I got my autism diagnosis, I went to a neuropsychologist. When I was getting my doctorate in psychology, they taught me, trained me heavily on doing the real personality tests, not like, what GI Joe are you, on the internet or whatever. But licensed clinical social workers in Washington state can do therapy. We've got licensed marriage and family therapists. We've got licensed mental health counselors who do, and most of those folks are master's level practitioners. So there's a lot of people who can do therapy. And it's really important to ask these questions, like, what's the, one question I love to ask people is like, what's the limits of what you can do for me?
Okay.
And that really does vary on state by state, and telehealth is just making that even more complicated. Like, this is part of the reason we disclaim things as heavily as we do. Like, if we were to give people individualized advice on here, we could get in a lot of trouble. Because depending, I believe the law is largely wherever the person resides is where we're considered delivering services. And yeah, that gets real complicated real quick.
So
ask questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the internet absolutely threw open the question of jurisdiction, because in some places where there's licensure or jurisdiction or registration, um, the jurisdiction stays with the therapist. In other words, I, as a counselor in BC, could potentially provide services elsewhere if there was jurisdiction, but in not all places. So you could be in California and your therapist could be in, I don't know, Idaho or something, but they might not actually have jurisdiction to work with you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in California, their state might limit who they can work with. It might only be people in their own state or province. And so if they're working with an out of province or out of state client, then you need to know whether they have jurisdiction. And they can still work with you if you want them to, but then there needs to be a disclaimer and some real clarity around their scope of practice, what they're able to do, what they're not able to do, what you're able to do in terms of a complaints process if it doesn't work out with them for some reason.
Right.
That's not just, oh, they didn't suit me as a therapist, but no, they did actual harm.
Mm.
So.
Well, hey, Mitra.
Hey, Dr. B.
Hey, Mitra. Again, I'm going full Harry Carey on everybody. Hey, Mitra. I've got a question.
Send it my way.
As a heads
if
up,
you're a hot dog and you're starving to death, would you eat yourself? I know I would.
I just want the viewers and listeners to know this is exactly how our meetings go pre-show. Like, this is like Mitra will say something very in depth, and we're sitting here nodding
right now. But no, one question, and this is one I really want to make sure we address is, like, how can people approach you as a therapist if they feel like sessions aren't going well? Like, what could they do?
So we're in the middle of a session and they're feeling unheard, or something isn't being said right, or they're feeling, super uncomfortable. My hope is I'd notice. Like, really, I think I should be tuned in enough to notice where it's not going well and say, hey, what's happening for you? But if it's the client who's noticing, I want them to say, this isn't working right now, or I'm feeling really uneasy, or you're not helping, or this thing you said here, I'm kind of stuck on that and it's not working for me, or, I want them, because I'm human, and I make mistakes.
You want them to say this.
I want them to say that they aren't comfortable if that is what is happening for them.
Wow.
I want them to correct me. I want them to interrupt me. I want them to tell me if I've got something wrong. So if I'm saying, yeah, I'm kind of wondering if this relates to that conversation we had last time about your mother when you shared such and so. If it doesn't, I want them to say, no, that's not it. If I go for, how are you feeling about this? Or I suggest that maybe they're feeling such. Or could it be that they're experiencing some betrayal right now, blah, 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 and they say, no, that's not it. That's really important. So I always talk about how I'm going to work with someone. It's important to be, and I noticed someone in the stream shared this, it's important to be collaborative with your clients.
Yeah.
Probably,
because
and
it's about them.
I used to do that overtly.
Yeah.
Just really emphasize it, like,
Yep.
No question about it. Like, I work for you. I'm here to meet your goals. If I'm not doing that, we need to fix something here about what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go ahead and take a look at what chat has been up to while we've been having these great conversations.
Hi, chat.
Hello, chat.
Hello.
Good to see you.
How
all.
y'all doing?
Good to see you. First one on my list is actually from Erin M. Evans, my co-host from Champions of Lore. She says, "I'm so glad the show is around." Well, thank you.
I love that question.
Really
Thank you for
super
being
easy.
here, Erin. Margaret, CNE Margaret says fit is so important. Just like having that cohesive thing between you and your therapist is 100% true. Obo Lauren says it's like finding the right D&D game. You can have all the good people who are all being wonderful to each other, but not everyone wants to play the same kind of game. It's no one's fault. You just deserve to find a group you connect with. 100% true. Yeah,
For sure.
Good.
Well, and I'll say that my personal opinion is that a good therapist worth their salt is going to recognize that there's going to be a lot of, just like finding a good DM is going to recognize that maybe their table isn't your jam, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And a good therapist, I think a good ethical therapist is going to try and work with you to find the best care that they can help you with. Like, if maybe they are not a specialist in the area that you need, they're going to try and help you find somebody who meets your needs. I've done that, many times in the past.
Yeah.
I would it almost be like saying like the first time with your therapist should almost be treated like a session 0 for like a D&D
yes. Game? Oh my God, yes.
Definitely. Well put. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like really like putting that analogy with what Lauren was saying and thinking about it, like, and what both of you had been saying through the whole episode of what to talk with your therapist the first time, it really does sound like a session 0 for D&D, where it's like, these are my boundaries, these are what I'm looking for in this. Does this match up what you are here for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want an X card in therapy now. Because crying isn't always the clue. Sometimes crying is a good thing.
Yeah, it is.
And that's where it's so important to have that process where you're checking in, your therapist is checking in with you on what's happening for you. Because if they're telling you what you're feeling, that's not great, because your experience, being able to stay present with your own feelings in that safe place, is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but speaking of session zeros, we're talking about what people need to ask a therapist. I think when you phone them initially, or contact them, or email them, however you're getting in contact, ask them if they do a free consultation. Not all therapists offer it off the bat. They should. I do, but not everyone does.
I
It
think so
doesn't mean
too.
they're not good therapists. Okay. So, but ask them, can you have, a quick Zoom chat? Can you, if you're meeting in person, which we're not right now, would they be willing to meet with you for 20 minutes or half an hour? I give people a half-hour free consultation. No ifs, ands, or buts. I want them to have that time to get to know me, for me to get to know them, a little bit of a brief discussion about their goals in therapy or what's coming up for them. And then that's an opportunity to ask these questions about work and education and modalities of practice, and what worked for them and what didn't before. Because then they can come into that first session having a sense of, the fees, the rules, the expectations, the confidentiality, what happens here. They can come in really prepared to settle in.
Once again, with red flags from my previous therapist, I'm like, you're supposed to talk to your therapist before the first session?
Not every therapist does. That's
No.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah,
that's good to know.
okay.
That really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Garwar has a question. Do you have any tips for people with anxiety who have trouble making their that first step of going to see a therapist because they're worried about them not being the right fit?
That's a really tricky one, and I'll say that's one I struggle with sometimes. Yeah, that's something that I occasionally struggle with. But one of the things I have to remind myself, and I have to repeat it over and over and over and over and over again. I have to go to find out.
Yeah. There's only one way you're going to find out.
And I also have to repeat something I just said, that any good therapist is going to try and work with me to find a good fit, because ethically their goal is to be as helpful as possible.
Yep.
And if they realize that they're not a good fit, and we get all this stuff out on the table, and then I start having a discussion with, hey, here's what I'm looking for and here's what I'm not looking for, and they're like, oh, well, I may not be the right fit for this. I expect that a sign of a good therapist is that they're going to be like, hey, well, here's an idea. Here's someone I know who might be a good fit for you.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that can happen in a consultation or even a phone call where you have 10 or 15 minutes is getting a sense of that fit, and even asking about a willingness to refer out.
Oh
If
yeah.
you don't think that that I'll be a good fit, or if you don't think that it's going to work in terms of me as the client and you as the therapist, would you have other names for me? And really, once I have a half hour with someone, I don't know 100% if I'm always going to be a good fit for them, because work changes over time and their needs do as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to know if we're looking at referring out. And referring out is a really good thing. If you come and see me and I get a clearer sense of what you need, then I can give you the names of some people who really do work the way you need them to, or work with those issues that are so important to you and are coming up for you. So, yeah.
Before I go to the next one, I do really feel like we needed an editor's note for the podcast version while Mitra's talking that just says Treavor and Dr. B nod.
A lot.
A lot.
We
Just
agree with Mitra a lot.
so much.
Just assume we're nodding.
My wife pointed out to me
Aw.
after last week's stream that the chat was just like Trevor and Dr. B nod, and I could not notice it this time. Let's see. The next question, Monkey Heinous says, with the shift, this is a question that I don't particularly know if both of you are going to have input in, but I wanted to hear what you guys wanted to say about it anyways. With the shift to telemedicine over the last year, do you think that it has helped or harmed people trying to combat the stigma around seeking out therapists?
Given I had to call 60 people last week and every one of them said they were full, I'm guessing it's been helping.
Okay, yeah. Well, and like it also might be, it might not be the that it's transitioned to this online way of doing it, but because this last year like was a really big push for people like, oh, I'm not okay because everything's not okay. Yeah.
I do wonder if the global sense of not being okay, because hey, who's okay in a pandemic? Like, we're all struggling with something or the other. I do wonder if that's actually made it easier. Yes, in terms of asking for support from mental health professionals, or asking generally for support for your mental health. But the specific question was also around telemedicine. I think it depends on where you are. It is true that there's more therapists that are busy, but it's also true that you may have more access to finding therapists than you did before.
Mm-hmm.
And you may have more access to therapists who are out of state or elsewhere, as long as there's still some jurisdiction, or you're super comfortable working with them. But my hope is there's jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Couple other quick ones. Pancakes 337, who is Lee Goldberg from Griddle Champions, says cognitive therapy was a huge part of helping me get sober. And as I always say to you, Lee, I'm so happy and proud of you that you did.
That's great.
Also, then he comes back and says, I feel like this is maybe my favorite show on this network right now.
I flip you over to our side.
Very witty.
Terrible Tank has one that I really do enjoy that says, much like my time as a mechanic, I rather than saying see you soon, my goal was hope I don't have to ever see you again. So yeah, no, I like that. This is
like
relating to Dr. B's which G.I. Joe am I? Wait, are you telling me which Spice Girl are you? Quiz meant nothing? That was from Mox Pearl.
Oh yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna go down to this one. Actually, Mox Pearl comes back and says, oh no, sorry, it was Sir Arabin. One of the difficulties right now is that there are so many therapists are fully booked, or they're only available during regular work hours. Sites like Talkspace provide a lot of additional options, but require you to sign up and pay before even trying the service. Do you have any advice on how to find available therapists during this busy time?
Gosh.
Boy, if I had an easy answer for this, I would have found a therapist last week. It's really hard. It's like, I have never had so much difficulty finding a good therapist as I have right now. And I'm going to once again say what I'm saying to myself, and that is keep trying, or in the words of Dory, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. I'm calling around until I find somebody. But in the meantime, what I'm doing is I'm also looking up. The cool thing about the internet these days is that there's enough people who are doing scientifically based information delivery on YouTube, that there's some really good stuff out there. And I'm looking for YouTubers and content creators who base their stuff in science and are good science communicators, especially for autism, because there aren't a lot of adult autism specialists in practice right now.
You were tweeting about that last week. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so frustrated. I know almost all of them in Seattle personally, or they volunteered for Take This. So not like I can see them.
Yep.
Yeah. So I have one suggestion, and this may relate to those in the US as well as Canada. That's my hope. But crisis lines sometimes are also referral lines. And so it can be a good idea to call particularly the ones that are more local to your area and say, listen, I'm not in crisis, and be clear about this, up front. I'm not in crisis. I'm looking for referrals. Can you help me with this? Right? And sometimes they'll refer you to low-cost counseling or therapy in your area. Sometimes it's short term, but it can be up to 10 to 12 sessions, and it can really help with crisis work. And crisis lines can also be someone to use as a sounding board in that moment. It doesn't mean you're necessarily experiencing a lot of suicidal ideation. It might be that you're just experiencing some distress and need someone to talk to. And they can help with that. And you just, again, need to be specific about where you're at in the moment, and they can help. So that might be one route for people in the short term.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna do this one because it cracks me up every time. Robo Goblin 01 says crying is a great free action. Abyssal Icarus, this one I wanted to bring up because I had the same thought while both of you were talking about the first session. The problem I found with first sessions or so, I'm still in full quote people pleaser mode. New people must make must make new people like me mode. I totally get that because I do the same thing. I, half joking, half seriously say that, like, if I'm not in a great place and I'm going to see friends or something like that, I put on a mask. I'm just a completely different person. And that's what I probably did my first session of therapy. And for me, and what I'm going to try and do in the future, and again, this is not perfect advice or anything like that, what I'm probably going to do is fully admit, hey, as a heads up, I'm probably wearing a mask right now, and I'm probably trying to get you to like me. So being honest about
I do
that,
the same thing.
Because that's the thing, like admitting that is part of the thing that you're there to help with. So admitting it to your therapist is a great first step, in my opinion.
I do that for myself as well. Again, being autistic, I often blend in with the crowd by just kind of meeting other people's expectations. And that's a bit of a double-edged sword. And I will just call myself out to my therapist on first meetings.
And I'm going to say, I expect as a therapist that people are doing that. Pretty much, because when you come in to see a therapist, you're also face-to-face with your reasons for being there. Whether you express those to your therapist or not, you're thinking about them, of course. And sometimes that can be scary too. So sometimes that's a reason to kind of just want to feel like I'm going to be safe in here, and I'm going to make sure my therapist likes me because this is really hard for me to say. A heads up though, most things you're going to say, your therapist isn't going to be completely surprised by. And they've probably, if they're good and they've been working for a while, they've probably heard it all. And the things that are shocking or difficult or even traumatic in a person's life, your therapist can hold the space for that.
100%.
You need to feel when you say them that you're safe. And if you don't, that's a good sign that that's not the therapist for you, by the way. But it's
Very, yeah.
natural to put a mask on when you first meet anyone. We all do it, and so it takes a while to kind of, you're going to come in, you're going to have the mask, you need to feel safe.
Yeah.
And if for you it means people like me, trust me when I tell you, most times your therapist will really like you, because I really care deeply for all my clients. And it's simple. They're vulnerable with me. They're
Hmm.
honest. They're doing their work. And if that's where they're at, I'm going to so appreciate that about them. And I want to nurture, protect, support, help them, not protect them, but just be there for them,
Hmm.
create that safe place for them. So,
Yeah.
The last thing I'm
Trev-
gonna say here before we start to wind down the show is Chrono Alarm. Your question, we can't answer that one because again, this is not for medical advice, but I would recommend you take a look at takethis.org/mental-health-resources, and they might be able to help you out there. Mox Pearl, also, if you would like a right, I think Dr. B, you said that Take This also has a list of questions that is good to ask a therapist, right? Isn't that a
No, but we could put that on. I could make that an important thing at our next written content pitch meeting for our content providers. What we do have is a fantastic flowchart infographic about how to find a therapist who's good for you. I believe it's under our expert content section, or I can just throw that into the chat in just 1 second here.
okay?
Um,
Lastly, we'll get one more in here from Hazen that just says, "Do therapists also need therapy?"
I'd like to tackle
Yeah.
that one. Sure, absolutely. Um, Therapists need therapy sometimes. Therapists also need supervision from other therapists, hopefully who are senior to them and can be mentors.
Hmm.
Absolutely. It is really important, critically, in fact, that we are able to do our own work, because we don't want to bring that into our sessions with our clients.
Yeah.
We want to work on our biases and, um, and the things that we're dealing with in terms of maybe grief or loss or whatever, so that we're free and clear to be present for our clients.
I don't remember the situation, but I remember someone joking around me. It's like, oh yeah, a therapist needs a therapist, and I got very serious. I'm like, I genuinely hope that they go to therapy, because again, like when I say
Yes.
everyone needs therapy, I don't exclude the therapists.
Well, one thing to think about, and just really quickly, is the statistics around mental health diagnostic rates in the United States. And I got dinged. I couldn't throw in a link. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
Jay was
hold
just
on.
letting me know about that. If you can get me the link.
There you are. I just sent it to you.
Okay.
I'm not special enough. One of the things to bear in mind, and I hope this has kind of come through in this, therapists, mental health professionals are human too. And depending on the research you look at in the United States, roughly 1 in 2 people are going to be diagnosed with a mental health condition in their lifetime, 1 in 5 in a given year. And those statistics are fairly consistent across most developed nations. And so just think about those statistics, that, we're mental health professionals are human too. And also, a lot of us get into this because we were inspired for some reason. We want to help people for a reason.
Yeah. I feel like that is a good place to stop this episode. I feel like we talked. He's taking off the bow tie. the Dr. B costume is slowly coming off. So I feel like this is a really good conversation. Thank you both for being here to have it. Where can people find you if they'd like to hear more from you?
I have a website at mitrajordan.com, and a contact form there. You can use that to reach me. I have a Twitter handle at mitrajordan, which you can use to reach me. I'm available.
You can find, I'm around at takethis.org. If you follow us on all the socials at takethis.org, and if you look right down there, there's my personal Twitter handle, and you can follow me on the Twitters, and I will bombard you with tabletop RPGs and random musings.
You could find me on Twitter at the Treavor. There is an A hiding in there. I don't usually I don't have as much good insight as the other two, but I sometimes post funny pictures of my cat with her tongue out. Um, but yeah, so that is going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much to Jay for moderating. Could not do the show without you. Thank you to Codename Entertainment for letting us come here and have these open conversations about mental health. We really do hope that you, not only the viewers, but the listeners, are getting something out of this, and we appreciate you being here. But yeah, until next week, take care of yourself.